Hi, Gary Zacharias here with the Apologist bookshelf. Well, we know artificial intelligence is coming, isn't it? And it's going to change the world. In fact, it is already. And we're all going to be changed. And so the question for we as Christians would be, how are we going to navigate our way through these changes? What does Christianity have to say about this brave new world? What's that going to be like to live for Jesus in a world where humans, made in God's image, we believe, coexist with intelligent machines that are made in our image? So the book is called Made in Our Image, subtitled God, Artificial Intelligence, and You. Stephen Driscoll is the author. Now, Driscoll, if you want to know something about him, he studied in Australia. He's worked for the Australian Fellowship of Evangelical Students, and he loves training and teaching students, it says, about all sorts of topics. So I want to give you kind of a quick overview of what others have said, what the foreword mentions, and then maybe one of his chapters here. So here's a person who's head of the Gospel Coalition in Australia, and he says AI is going to be one of the most disruptive technological developments in the history of humanity. Boy, how's that for a statement? And it says that this book shows how the deep structures of biblical thought and the unfolding of redemption history equip us for this disruption. In other words, we can handle it, right? So that's very positive. And he also says, this is Mikey Lynch, he also says the book is very approachable for the non-academic, and I agree. Another person who's the head of a theological college in Australia says, sometimes the right book comes along at the right time. And they said this is such a book. It says it has timeless biblical truth. It charts a way forward in response to this issue in a way that would honor Jesus and love others. One other individual says, if you want a short, engaging, insightful, and theological discerning book on the technological revolution that's going to be more influential than the internet, it's in your hands. Enjoy. So a lot of praise for this book, and I think it's well-deserved. It's only, well, they call it a short book. It's actually, it's under 200 pages. And I know you'd get a lot out of it. So I'm going to the foreword. These are the questions being asked. What is AI? What are its capabilities? What benefits will it bring? What drawbacks will come alongside these benefits? Will we finally decide AI is worth it? And again, the person that wrote the foreword says, we have other questions because we're Christians. What's our responsibility before the Lord when we consider a technology that may have huge power for good, for bad, or for both? How could AI help or hinder our spiritual lives and our ability to carry out the Great Commission? How might it impact the local church? How might it fail to reflect God's mind, God's plans, and God's desires? Said most of us didn't ask those questions when the internet came along, when social media came along, and the mobile phone came along. Said we owe it. We should be doing this. And the comment here at the end of the foreword was that the author urges us to be cautious, courageous, and discerning, that we need to approach technology in a distinctly Christian way. So I'm going to skip a couple of chapters and start on chapter 3, which is called Identity Implosion. And it's called Creation and Artificial Intelligence. So what the author, I need to back up and tell you what the author is going to do. He is going to look at AI from the perspective of a very simple framework, Christian framework. One is creation, then sin, then the cross of Jesus, and then the new creation. So my section here, look at the title, Creation and Artificial Intelligence, is going to take on that first issue, creation. And so he starts off saying, in some ways, AI is a little bit like Darwinism. Think about what happened there. Darwin burst forth in the 1860s and 70s, and he really changed the way many people thought about humanity, about our identity, about our dignity. So deep spiritual questions kind of got tossed, didn't they? It all concerned itself now about natural selection. And the author says artificial intelligence goes further. It says that some kind of form of intelligence can be made if you have the right algorithms, right? Those are like rules, and the right scale. So another natural outcome, right? It says soon we're going to be the species ranked between computers and dolphins. We're smarter than dolphins, but dumber than our phones. And that's funny, except that really is going to shake up our idea of identity. He says the computers are going to keep improving. More and more, we're going to be grouped with the dolphins and less with electronics. He said, what does that do to our sense of dignity? What does it do to our sense of identity? What does it do to even understanding what it means to be human? I mean, those are huge questions, aren't they? And he said the Western world already was having a huge implosion of identity problems, and AI is coming along in the midst of that. He said things could be about to get very ugly when it comes to our sense of identity. He said, so what's going on? Why is identity mattering so much to us right now? We've got a lot of other issues to wrestle with, but why is identity near the top? And by the way, can I just interject something here? J. Warner Wallace has a book out called The Truth in True Crime. And he said for people to flourish, they need a good, solid sense of identity. And this world around us doesn't offer that. Only Christianity offers it. So let me come back to the book here. But it really struck me that this author, Driscoll, is doing the same thing that J. Warner Wallace is. So his question was, why are we making such a big deal about identity now? He said, well, we're wealthy. And he then moves to what are called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it's like a pyramid. Maybe you've seen that before. The idea is that people focus on bottom level needs before moving up to the top level. So, for example, if you don't have food and water, you don't worry about self-actualization. He said, he has a great example. If a wolf is chasing you, you don't think about finding your true self. So first it's food and water. Once you get that, safety, that's the most important thing. You move up the pyramid. Once you're safe, then you focus on love. Okay, once you found love, you move up. You focus on self-esteem. Once you have that, you move to self-actualization, becoming your true self. He said, so that's a general truth. And he said that's the way it works. So where's identity on that hierarchy? It's right up there toward the top. If you want to be your true, authentic self as deeply, as often as you can, that's more of a priority when all these other needs of life are met. So our focus on identity is partly because we're affluent, and we've taken care of these other needs. He said Driscoll, lives in one of the safest, wealthiest democracies in history. He's in Australia. He said the lights work here. There aren't any tanks in the street. He said so many songs and films and TV shows are about identity. That is the issue of our time. Who are you at the core of your being? He said that's the key question people want to ask. It's a foundational issue. It sits below a whole bunch of other things. That you dig down like into political movements for the past decade, and it's competing claims about identity. He said that our culture just makes a big deal saying that finding your identity really, really matters. Every time kids watch TV, that's the message. But, and of course, here's the key question, how does our culture today believe you go about finding your identity? How do you find your true self? And again, if I can go back to J. Warner Wallace in his book, The Truth in True Crime, he echoes this exact same thing. We are trying to find our identity in very, very poor ways. Well, anyway, so back to Driscoll here. He quotes from a Marvel superhero, Black Widow, who says, at some point, we all need to choose between what the world wants you to be and who you are. He said, boy, that could have come from a dozen different Disney films. There's the identity the world pushes on you, and then there's the identity you discover down deep. So where do you go? Where should you find your identity? Not from what culture pushes off on you. It's got to be deep down, inside. He says, go your own way has been used recently by car companies, Alfa Romeo and Ford and Isuzu and Mazda and Suzuki and Toyota. And that's just car companies. He said there's a chain of clothing stores. They sell their jeans with the phrase, led by none. So he says, if you're led by none, obey the advertisements and go buy their jeans. That's kind of funny. But it comes down to your true self is found within. Okay, he says identity sells insurance. It sells funerals. It sells accounting services, shoes. He said nobody even talks about how durable the rubber is on the shoes. Shoes are based on identity. All the marketing budgets in the world, he said, are in lockstep, telling you you have to go your own way. You've got to find yourself. He said that can't help but have an impact on the way we think. But he says, oops, here's the problem. Our culture says that finding your identity really, really matters. And yet, our culture, he says more than almost any before that, can't provide meaningful identities. We offer very little, but we demand so much. Isn't that powerful? Over and over, we're told, find your identity, find your true self. But what are they? Where are they? We can't find them. So what identities does our culture offer? Well, it says it says basically attach your identity to secondary things. And so people are doing that. He'll give some examples here. And the mental health, especially among young people, has collapsed. He said we're in free fall in terms of our identities. He says young people in particular are really struck by the brunt of our culture's confusion. We're so concerned about identity. And he said we can't let this collapse in mental health continue. And it does continue. He said if you don't believe in God, one of your foundational beliefs is you're an accident, right? You're just a fluke of the universe. You aren't intentional. You are inadvertent. The universe didn't plan to bring you into existence, and it certainly won't mourn your death. Why are you here? Why do you exist? Well, what are we told? It was an explosion in space-time, entropy, Darwinian selection, trillions of neurons firing away to keep you alive. That's the atheist foundation. So think about evolution. Why are women here? They're to attract men to bear children. Well, why are men here? To attract women and make children. Their job is to work until the children get old enough to have their own kids. People hit a certain age, they don't offer much to the species, they start consuming more resources, so they should die. Your genes get you to care about all sorts of things so that you'll make good decisions and pass on your genes. Life is just an odd event in a little corner of the universe. It's a light that flickers on, then flickers off, because the sun is going to cool one day. Nothing will be here. Isn't that depressing? But he's really nailed it. He says these are the foundational beliefs for people who see themselves in a godless universe. But that can't carry the weight of our search for identity. So where do you look for your identity? Well, work, your intelligence, maybe your gender, maybe a style of clothing, the sport you play, your hobbies. I mean, what is it? If you don't have God, you're desperate to come up with some identity. You reach for something to hold on to. He quotes the French mathematician Pascal, who said, this is what life is like without a knowledge of God. So I'm going to quote it. It's a lengthy quote, but I think it's really, really good. I see the terrifying immensity of the universe which surrounds me, and find myself limited to one corner of this vast expanse without knowing why I am set down here rather than elsewhere, nor why the brief period appointed for my life is assigned to me at this moment rather than another in all the eternity that's gone before and will come after me. On all sides I behold nothing but infinity, in which I am a mere atom, a mere passing shadow that returns no more. All I know is that I must soon die, but what I understand least of all is this very death, which I cannot escape. And he said, there you are. He said, there's your emptiness. And he said, what are you doing? You're at a pants store trying to get your identity. How's that for irony, huh? He said, during this explosion, or he calls it an implosion of identity, we're losing our sense of identity, he said, along comes AI, a device that can do what we do, but it does it better. And it's by true superiority. We've made a device, he said, that will be better than us. It might be smarter. It might be more creative. He said it's going to be us, but just not as lame and as uninspired. And what's that going to do to our sense of identity? Good question. What will it do over decades to our sense of self-worth? He said, I don't think the outcome will be good. Now, let's get to this. That's the bad news, right? So like any good preacher, you got bad news, and then you offer the good news. So there's the bad news. At this point, he says, good news. Christianity offers something of incredible value. He says, in a world short of cash, we Christians are walking around with diamonds in our pockets. We offer a foundation for identity. It goes back to the beginning. Christians have powerful anchors for their sense of identity. And this is where the apologetics comes in. What's the value of Christianity? A lot of people today say there's no value to Christianity. In fact, it's harmful. No, it's not. Christians have anchors for our sense of identity, and they'll hold up even as artificial intelligence bursts upon our culture. So he said, what is a human? So he goes back to Genesis 1. And he tells the story of the creation again. And God creates man in his own image. So he said, God is the opposite of artificial intelligence. God is personal. He's not physical, but he's personal. Artificial intelligence is physical, but it's not personal. So you got that opposition there. So he says that Genesis passage, what does it tell us about the identity of the human species? And this is just some ideas here. He said, humans are made in the image of God. He said, notice the animals don't get that description. You're not just an animal. You're something special. You're like God in some sense. And of course, the question is, how are we like God? We're not divine. It seems like a great difference between the two of us. So there's something about us. We have some kind of characteristic. So what are these terms? So God and humans. And the Bible won't tell us specifically the comparisons, but he said it could be our reason, it could be our personality, free will, self-consciousness, higher intelligence, moral awareness, or our relational potential. It could be a mix, he said. But he said, whatever the exact term is, what's clear is, no, we're not gods, but we are like God in incredible ways, and we're unlike animals in just those same ways. So not only are we like God, but in Genesis 1:26, we have a role given to us from God. And it says, let them have dominion over the fish and the birds and the livestock and all this stuff. So dominion is the language of a monarch. Our job is to rule the earth. We're going to rule the earth. Isn't that amazing? He says Genesis offers the end of history at the beginning of history, right from the start. It says all people are made in God's image, right? And then the most important part is, he says that passage about identity gets overlooked. Identity flows from God, not from within. He said, we have a problem. We have to choose between who God made us to be and who we want to be. Yeah. And he tells a story, which I love stories. So he said, we're walking around, we kind of like have the rags of lordship. We're wallowing around this fallen earth and not even maybe aware of our image from God. So he gives this story. When the French Revolution took place in the late 18th century, King Louis XVI was executed. Now, he had a son, Louis XVII. He was the rightful king of France. He was really the ruler of the land, but he lived his life in filth and rags. He was taken from his mother, that was Marie Antoinette, and he lived a life of deep poverty. He no longer looked like a king. He looked like a beggar. And so Driscoll says, that's us. He says, the worst part is our poverty is self-inflicted. We have been made in the image of God. We've been set to rule the universe. But what are we doing? We're living in filth and sin. Wow, that's really challenging, isn't it? Now, there's a lot more to the chapter. I'm trying to decide if I've got the time to go through it or not. It's kind of lengthy, so maybe I'll stop here and we'll do the second half of the chapter in just another podcast or two. But I love what he's getting at here, that AI comes along and it demotes us if we're not careful. But we don't need to be demoted if we realize we're made in the image of God. Nothing else has been made in the image of God. And we were made for a job, for a duty. And that's a big job, to rule the universe. So I like this book. Again, it's called Made in Our Image. And it comes from a Christian perspective, which I think is hugely important. And I want to cover the other half of the chapter. Maybe I'll do that in the next podcast so you get a little continuity there. Well, thank you so much for being part of this podcast. And I hope your day is going well. Talk to you later.